Hello viewers, today we are going to talk about Rafael Nadal, and by we I am alluding to a special guest who has finally agreed to join us on the show. He is my oldest friend, a friend of more than 25 years. 25 years. That reveals more about my age than I'm really comfortable revealing here. We have talked about Rafael Nadal for ages. Sometimes we used to talk about him in class when we should have been paying attention to what was being taught. We've been talking about Rafael Nadal during coaching classes, during our interactions on social media, and finally, we are going to talk about Rafael Nadal for the benefit of my viewers on YouTube, because I received a request from one of my viewers to talk about Rafael Nadal now that he has announced his retirement from professional tennis. So without further ado, let's welcome Raunaq Sahu for the first time on my YouTube channel. Hello, Raunaq.
Hi, how are you doing?
So in the intro, I had the temerity to describe you as my oldest friend, a friend of more than 25 years now.
Yeah, that's about accurate. I don't think there are going to be any disputes to that. So
Yes. So that's like, are you comfortable with the notion of being friends more than 25 years, which indirectly reflects how old we are?
why not? I mean, today I was watching an old George Harrison interview. He was talking about this. You don't really change much between 17 and 60. Your your body changes, and again, this is a theme we'll deal with now that we are going to talk about the great Rafael Nadal. So your body just doesn't want to do the things you thought you could and wanted to do. So that's pretty much the only change. I'm in agreement with Mr. Harrison. So no problems with the longevity of a friendship or. So I think we are in, yeah, no,
Speak-
no,
Speaking
no
of
counter to
the
that, to be
Speaking
honest.
of the lack of change, what has not changed is that we have always been talking about Nadal. We started talking about him in
Yeah,
classrooms where we should have probably been paying attention to what was being taught.
yeah,
Then on school trips when we went
absolutely.
elsewhere, on social media, and finally we are talking about him on Olympics.
Yep,
So
yep, yep.
with all that out of the way, what would you say is your earliest memory of Rafael Nadal?
My earliest memory would have to be, I think before I saw him play on TV, I would have seen his. I remember the Davis Cup victory in which he played a key part when they were playing the US. I think it was before 2005, so it was probably 2004. I remember he beat Andy Roddick in a quite. I mean, so we probably read the news report on in the Telegraph the following day. So my first memory of him is just how incongruous, I mean, his look was. I mean, in a sport where everyone looked a certain way, here you had this guy with, I mean, long hair, bandana, sleeveless Nike tee, rippling muscles, capri pants. I mean, it was borderline ridiculous and quite frankly hilarious as well. But then, I mean, doesn't matter what your sartorial choices are or what your idiotic ticks and habits are between points and at the changeovers. I mean, if you win enough and if you do it well, I think people tend to overlook these things. Maybe we are going to talk about the rituals and all of that later. So I don't know if I sort of preempted a question
No,
there,
no. You,
but but yeah, that was my first memory, to be honest. It just and also the fact that okay, this guy seems to be good because he's delivered. But how old was he? 18, I think he was when he achieved that, and that was a critical match in that Davis Cup tie. So it was not like he won some inconsequential or relatively straightforward match. So that was impressive. That's probably my first memory.
So my first memory would be the match at Miami where he beat Federer in straight sets,
Yeah, yeah.
and and it was quite comprehensive. The very first match it didn't even look close at that time. And
Again, yeah. So there was that match, and I think the news report alluded to the fact that he had beaten his mentor and former world number one Carlos Moya. I mean,
yes.
so those are things which you remember these things, right? This is not normal. I mean, this was a 17, 18-year-old who was clearly not normal. So, so yeah. I mean, that has to be the earliest memory.
So at what point, so you've answered two questions. My first question was earliest memory. The second would have been first impression. So you've answered both. I would like to know, when did you first realize that Nadal would feature and be regarded by many as the greatest tennis player of all time? When was the first moment you felt he would reach those heights?
So I'm not going to pretend uh, that I knew this was going to happen when he won that match against Mariano Puerta in May 2005, sorry. Because you know this, right? I mean, back then there was a pattern. Um, I think Jimmy Connors said this, right? In an era of XYZ specialists, you are either a clay court specialist or a grass court specialist, or you're Roger Federer. So I mean, you had all these champions, barring, of course, the likes of Gustavo Kuerten, who won multiple clay court titles and multiple French Open titles. There was generally a pattern where, let's say Juan Carlos Ferrero, Gaston Gaudio, these kinds of players would come and go, especially, obviously very specialized games, particularly suited to the clay. And that was typically, as a Sampras fan and well wisher, obviously Roland Garros was this, chodo, ye kaun sa slam hai. I mean, that was, I probably was guilty of that attitude as well. And generally, you knew that people who do well at Roland Garros generally did not really have their game translate so well onto the other surfaces. Having said that, there is a entirely separate discussions, which all the three fan bases are always, hammer and tongs at it. That surfaces are normalized now. If this had not happened, there is no way that Djokovic would have won so many Wimbledons. There is no way Nadal would have won so many hard court and a couple of Wimbledons and Queens and all of that. Leaving that aside, right? Yes, probably it's true. Surfaces got normalized, but what doesn't change is, a player's, I mean, the truly great ones, the willingness to improve and add things to their games. So for me, the first time I realized that this guy is here to stay is when he made back-to-back Wimbledon finals. I think 2006 was the year I was like,
Six and
okay,
seven.
there is,
Six was the
yeah,
first year, then seven.
6 and 7, yeah. That was when it seemed like, yes, this guy. I mean, and back then the gap between the end of Wimbledon and the end of the French Open and the beginning of Wimbledon was much shorter than it is now.
Yes.
So no matter what your argument is about surfaces getting normalized now, it still takes a lot of effort to be able to win seven best of five matches and then switch over to the grass at the All England club. So that was the truly impressive part. And honestly, it did not seem like uh, his game would translate so well. I mean, like seeing it firsthand, like right from the beginning, it did not seem like it was going to, but clearly it did.
So you would say that when he got to two Wimbledon finals back to back, that's when you realized
Yeah.
that he would be part of the discussion of.
Yeah, and he was regular. He was a regular fixture at all these other Masters tournaments as well, right? So, and he cemented his position as the world number two. So there was a great deal of consistency there as well, going deep into tournaments regularly. I think 2006 onwards, he was going deep into pretty much any tournament he played. So, I mean, that's what typically didn't happen in the pre-Federer era, I suppose, because you had. I mean, it was a normal thing, right? And again, I mean, we are sort of spoiled by the way these three players have sort of redefined what it means to be successful and consistent because you did not expect in the course of such a grueling and physical season of tennis, 11 months of tennis, one or two players to be there every single time, and we had three. So I mean, honestly, and you could see it pretty early in his career, right? 2006-7 onwards, this was the norm. Even then, though, it never seemed like he was going to win or even last long enough to win 20 plus majors because of how often he used to get injured. He's missed so many slams because of injuries as well. So, so yeah, I think it was a roundabout answer to the question, but I think I answered it at
Yes.
some point.
Yes. So now that we've discussed a lot about his career, we should have a look at some of the numbers which the official
Yes.
website of Roland Garros has come up with. It's just in numbers, and just this is Nadal at the French Open. So the first number, of course, is the big number, that is 14, which is the number of titles he has won. Which, just to give some context,
Number of Grand Slams the great Pete Sampras won in his
yes,
entire
that is
career.
true. But to give even more local context, the French Open singles title is named after the four French musketeers. Coupe des Musketeers is the thing. And
Yeah.
taken together, all four of them have won 8 titles. 8. One of them didn't win a singles title. Of course, they dominated in both singles and doubles. That was a different era. This is 20s and 30s. And they won 6 Davis Cups in a row. And taken together, the four French musketeers won 8 singles titles. And of course, Roland Garros is
There you have it.
one of those stadiums which is not named after a tennis player. Just a bit of trivia here. Roland Garros is a French aviator who didn't play tennis. So the point is, with these numbers, what I'm trying to highlight is there is a possibility, and should be, that there should be some way in which the French Open authorities immortalize Nadal as soon as possible. Because the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, there's that very fancy metal statue, right, of him like cracking a forehand. But I mean, I think in Barcelona the center court is called Pista Rafa Nadal. I
Yes.
think.
Yes.
I mean, maybe 10 years later they should just call center court. I mean, come on. The only thing is they're the French, so
Yes.
they probably won't ideally have one of their showpiece stadiums named after a Spaniard. But come on, I mean, what does a guy have to do? Win it 15 times?
And so much so that he won 14 times. He lost only 4 times. 2 of them were against Djokovic, 15 and 21, if I'm not wrong. Zverev was the last match he
Yeah.
lost. And way back in 2009, he lost to Robin Soderling.
Yeah.
He had, out of
That's mind-boggling.
112 wins at the French Open, 90 of them were in straight sets.
Yeah.
He has
Yeah.
lost.
I mean, the numbers are mind-bending.
He has lost only, I believe, 37 sets. 37 sets over 19 editions of the French Open. He has 24 victories of 6 love sets. 24. Do you remember his most dominant victory?
Oh yes. How can one forget the
No,
massacre of? Huh?
Okay, that is
in terms of the
score.
numbers.
In terms of score.
No.
In
I
terms of
don't, I
score,
don't.
his most dominant victory was 6 love, 6
What
1,
was the
6
score?
love, 6 love, 6 1, 6 love. This was
Against?
Nicolas Basilashvili in 2017.
Oh.
So now
Oh.
Nicolas Basilashvili is going to be immortalized because that was the most dominant victory of Nadal against.
I also, while we are on the numbers, I read this absurd number that he has lost 51 matches on clay in his entire career, but he has won 63 titles on clay. So he has won more titles than he has lost on that surface over the entirety of his career. It's just,
Yes. And only
that's
three
just
people,
insane.
only three of his victories took 5 sets. Only 3.
Yeah.
There was
The most.
Djokovic won in 2013. There was John Isner.
2011 John Isner.
Isner.
That was the one that almost got away.
Yeah, that was the first round, if I'm not wrong. Yes.
Yeah.
And One in 2022 with Felix Auger Aliassime. So
Tony Nadal's new client. I don't know if he's still Tony Nadal's client, but yeah.
also one of the most, I don't know if, I believe it's a compliment for both players. The most number of matches that Nadal played in the French Open was against Djokovic, 10, and he won 8 of them. So that's a reflection that Nadal continued to dominate, and also Djokovic was able to beat Nadal twice, the only person to do that.
Yeah, as I think I've said this earlier, right? Anybody who has beaten Nadal twice on that court in that tournament, for me, that is worth a couple of Grand Slams, additional Grand Slams, because
Yeah.
that truly, I mean, at least in this, I think it's in all of sport. If you think of the achievements which I mean, we think will never be beaten. Maybe they will, but at this point in time, looking back, you think there are some records which might never be broken, like Bradman's test batting average, right? This is one of them. I genuinely don't think this record can be beaten. I mean, it would take something.
Yes. And also, we should not forget that Nadal did not only win on the French Open. He
Yeah.
won 4 US Opens, which is big achievement.
If you take away, which is the second highest in the Open
Yes.
era.
4.
If you take away his 14 French Opens, he still has 8 Grand Slams,
Yes.
which is as many as Andre Agassi, who is
Yes.
an all-time great.
Yes.
So, I mean, even if we take the clay out of the equation, he was a pretty handy player.
He had 2 Wimbledon titles, 2 Australian Open, and 4 United States Open. And as you were alluding to, if you have the list of the top 10 major winners in the Open era, after you have the 3 of this era, you have Sampras at 14, Borg at 11, and then you have people at 8. You have Andre Agassi at 8, and then you have McEnroe at 7, a few others also at 8. So that 8 number, the whole definition of greatness got changed when these people came into the scene.
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so next question, after we have discussed so much about Nadal's great achievements, what would you regard as the lowest point of Nadal's career?
I think 2015 was one of those years, right? One was not the lowest point from a rankings or overall level perspective, but it was definitely psychologically a bit of a blow to him. That would be to the 2011 season where he took a beating against Djokovic. He just couldn't find a way to beat him. And in fact, later on, he didn't really find a way to beat him in, places which were not Roland Garros or not his, favored Monte Carlo, Rome, and those Masters tournaments, right? I think 2011 was one of those years where, if you look at the end of 2010, it seemed like his reign was just beginning, right? It genuinely seemed like he was going to win them all for the next 2-3 years, and then Djokovic changed his diet and everything changed. But that would be one phase. But yeah, the lowest point would probably be 2015, where I mean he had that like really absurd random loss to Fabio Fognini at the US Open. It was a very strange year, right? And obviously, the injuries. So if you map out his injuries against the seasons, you would see, I mean, a lot of ups and downs. But yeah, I mean, for me, off the top of my head, I would. In fact, I was seeing posts the other day where like legitimate journalists had written his obituary. I mean, his obituary has been written a lot. I mean, his career obituary. Not, hope he lives a long and healthy life. But yeah, there were several of these predictions, but 2015 seemed dire because it genuinely seemed like he did not have anything left in the tank. It genuinely seemed like the injuries had gotten the better of him and he was very close to retirement.
So 2015, it makes total sense. In fact, 2015 was the year when he lost quite convincingly to Novak at French Open, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
as you
that's
said,
right.
Novak Djokovic defeated Nadal at the French Open, but he went on to lose in the finals. He didn't win that year.
Which was hilarious. But anyway.
So although defeating Nadal should account for
I
a
mean, it just shows you, right? It just
yes,
shows even if you are Novak Djokovic, that's what it takes, right? I
yeah.
mean, that's what beating, like competing with Nadal on that court takes out of you, I guess.
And Nadal never lost a final at the French Open.
Yeah, and I think it was also because for Djokovic it was his in the way Federer in 2009, right? This was like this guy has finally lost, and you finally have an opportunity to win the title, and I think that's also a lot of pressure, right? So
Right.
because you never know because you send him to the on the court with a broken leg, and it seems like he's still going to win, so
Which he has in some events.
which he has.
So now that we've talked about this as the lowest point, let's talk about what you would regard. And think I believe this is the toughest question that I'm about to ask. What would you regard as the one match which you would think is your favorite match played by Rafael Nadal in his entire career?
Mm-mm.
There are
There
so
have
many
been
great
quite
matches.
a few, really.
Yes.
So many great matches. But
So you can probably rank it out one, two, three, maybe if that helps.
see, obviously, the 2008 Wimbledon final, fan favorite, and all the history and the stories and the significance, etc., etc. And quality wise, probably the greatest match of all time. But probably, the only match that comes close to it is the Bob McEnroe final. But if I were to pick a match of Nadal which embodies all his virtues as a player, I will pick a match he actually lost. It would have to be the 2012 Australian Open final. Because, again, honorable mention to the 2022 Australian Open final, because that was incredible. That was seriously incredible, improbable. Daniel Medvedev is no pushover, so it's not like he crumbled or. I mean, that was also incredible. Almost like a Hollywood script, right? Breakdown, two sets to love, love 40, etc., etc. But 2012 Australian Open, the reason I mentioned this final is because, again, I alluded to this earlier. 2011 was the season which was supposed to be Nadal's, this was going to be the beginning of a fairly long reign, right, at the top. And then the Novak Djokovic 2.0 happened, lost to him multiple times. And it was not just the fact that he lost to him, it was also the fact that in all those losses, at no point did he seem to be able to find solutions to the way Djokovic had started playing, right? Those patterns that he was consistently hitting the ball deep to Nadal's feet. Obviously, it helps that he has the greatest backhand of all time and he's the greatest returner of all time. But to be able to execute that so well, which was an incredible season, right, from Djokovic's perspective. And funnily, it was Federer who stopped him, and it seemed like only Federer could have stopped him. Even Nadal couldn't, right, that year.
At the French
To be
Open,
able
he
to
broke the streak.
at the French Open.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Nadal would not have won the French Open that year if Djokovic had reached the final. I mean, I know one does not simply beat Nadal at Court Philippe Chatrier, but that year, that's. I mean, Djokovic had him in a chokehold that year. So to be able to go back in the off season, I think there were some tweaks he also made to his game to be able to find those solutions, and to be able to produce that performance on what is Djokovic's arguably. I mean, I'm loath to say favorite court because I mean he wins them all, he wins everywhere. But that's one place where you could make a comparable case that it's not one does not simply beat Djokovic there. The fact that there was, I mean, nobody really thought Nadal was going to win that match, but just the shot making, the savagery. I think I just remember we were in college and we were watching it. A bunch of us were watching it, and some of the points it was physically taxing for us, sitting on our asses just
Yes.
watching it. I mean,
Yes.
that was war, as Orwell would say. It was war minus the shooting, and to be able to produce a performance like that, and he was a breakup in the fifth. I mean, he could have and probably should have won. There was that forehand he dumped into the net, which he shouldn't have, which was a like a regulation forehand which he missed, I think, on break point or on one of those critical points. But again, that match to me sums up all his virtues as a player. Even when everything is not going to plan, even when he's not hitting his spots like he normally does, he will grit his teeth and find a way to try and win. So I would say that's my favorite match.
Yes, so 2012 final remains one of the best tennis matches of all time. And despite Nadal not winning, it should be part of the discussion of his greatest matches. So it's part of my list also. But the match that I don't think is talked about as often, but I feel it was a match that really cemented his position as somebody, as a force to be reckoned with, was the 2009 Australian Open semi-finals against Verdasco.
Against Verdasco. Yeah.
So that match was a
And he came back and
match.
won the final in less
Yes.
than 24 hours.
So
So that was an insane.
till
Yeah,
that
yeah,
point, the pattern was that okay, you might win a grueling match, a grueling five-set encounter, but if you have a match
yeah,
immediately after that, and it's not against some rookie, you are playing against Roger Federer, who has already won so many Australian Opens. That was the time when Nadal had not won a
yeah,
single Australian Open, and
yeah.
Federer had already won in 2004, 2006, 2007, 2007. Yes, so these 3 years he had won. The 2009 final, after a match like that, without any rest, so that match itself, we talk about the 2009 final also, but we don't acknowledge now that so much time has passed. At that time, we found it unbelievable that he won the match in the final.
And Verdasco was hitting the lights out of that. I mean, he
Yes.
was hitting the felt out of that ball that day. Against anybody else, he would have won that match. He would have won that match. I think he had some insane number of winners. He was just hitting Nadal off the court. But I mean, that was incredible. And you're right. It genuinely did not seem, anybody would have enough left in the tank to beat Federer in a best of five final. But yeah, yeah,
When that
that
happened,
was
then you
also
realize that the tennis game as we knew it had changed. It was no longer a
yeah,
question of, oh, there are five setters, so then they'll not be able to do it. It changed the definition of it. And of course, that got cemented in the 2012 final where we had two players almost with, I would say, similar games, one right handed, the other left handed. And there was this commentary I remember, because most of tennis I have learned is through commentary. So I remember this that uh, in boxing, at least there are 15 rounds. But in tennis, it can go on forever. And it felt
yeah.
like that. They were not able to stand during the prize distribution ceremony. They had
During that insanely long speech by the representative from Kia Motors, who was just not shutting up.
So if I had more production value, I would have interspersed these discussions with actual footage, but all of this is in public domain and none of this is incorrect. Moving on, so my favorite Nadal match would be the Verdasco match, 2009, very closely followed by the 2022 match that you alluded to, because again, that was towards the end of his career. Again, we had started doubting
Yeah.
Nadal still had it in him. Again, Medvedev was a rising star, still is.
And
So,
so many finals. I mean, he has made a lot of finals across all four Grand Slams, right? Australia was one of those places where, for some reason, after that first title, it never went to plan.
yes.
It was always one of those, except the one he lost to Djokovic in 2019. I think that was a. I remember calling it the Melbourne Park massacre. That was something else from Djokovic. But the other matches, it was all, you felt like there was some element of luck missing, and it looked like it was going the same way in this match. Now that we are talking matches, another match I remember, incredible match, which again Nadal lost in straight sets, but fantastic match, was the 2016 Rome semi-final, I believe, against Novak Djokovic. That match, I think that's the famous. Robbie Koenig was on the comms box, and he had this line where he says, "Tennis nearer the gods, no mortal may approach." This was that match. That was I remember distinctly watching that match, like from beginning to end, incredible shot making and on clay. I mean, they were just hitting the ball. Both of them were pushing each other to incredible heights. I mean, I think it was 7-5 and 7-6 or something like that. Both sets, it was 7-7. Djokovic won in the end, but it could have gone either way. I think Nadal missed a couple of sitters in the second set tiebreaker. He could have easily taken it to the third. So now that we are talking matches, that's another one I remember. So that was, yeah, a lot to choose from all these three players. So we can do this all day.
As Captain America said. So we'll just briefly trace the career trajectory and then we'll come back again. Um, Nadal really became a pro in early 2000s, in 2003, I believe, 3 or 4. And then he won
Yeah,
his first
three.
French Open title in 2005. I believe that was his first appearance in the French Open tournament, and that was his first victory as well. He went on winning the French Open only till 2008 when he won his first other major, which was the Wimbledon title. So 4 French Open and then the first Wimbledon comes. Then in 2009 he wins Australian Open, doesn't win anything else.
Australian Open.
And then in 2010, which is the year you have been talking about frequently, is the year when he wins 3 out of 4 French Open, Wimbledon, and US Open. And I believe that was the year also when he changed his serve a bit. He started serving bigger.
Yes.
And
That was again the point I made earlier about. I think all three of them have had this. They have kept adding things to their game, which you typically don't see over the course of such a long and storied career. Like great players generally, like Sampras was famously stubborn. He never changed his racket. Right? There is a lot of legitimate speculation that he could have played longer and won much more if he would have played with a racket which had a larger head size, which is something Federer did. Federer also endured a horrible season when he changed his racket, but then that paid dividends later on. So I think all these three, right, Nadal included. I mean, we are talking about him now. Those are the things which I mean that separates the good from the truly great, right?
winning 3 out of 4, that really made us believe that now Nadal is going to go on a winning spree like Federer had from 6 and 7. Like he would have multiple 3 out of 4, maybe 4 out of 4 seasons, because Nadal didn't have any major at that time, which one would think would be a problem. Like Federer had French Open as a problem. Nadal didn't seem to have any problem. But then Novak Djokovic's rise came 2011, and Nadal gradually moved towards only winning French Open, but also winning the US Open occasionally. Always winning the French Open almost, and also winning the US Open. So that's his career trajectory, and we will have a last few questions now. So the next question for Raunaq would be, what is the one trait that Nadal has exhibited throughout his career that you have never seen in any other tennis player of any era? That we've been watching tennis since the 90s, and we've been familiar with tennis players from other eras also. Is there one trait that you can identify in Nadal's game that you did not see in any other tennis player?
I mean, obviously, all great champions have broadly the same set of virtues because there are 4 or 5 very fundamental things you have to do day in and day out to keep winning. But one of the things that always sticks out when you watch and when, like we have seen his career right from the beginning till the end, I think in many instances, his victories were not just about superior skill, but it was also about superior will. I think, I mean, several of his matches, and it's not just about the matches. The fact that he was in the top 10 for 900 odd weeks, I think 910 or 915 odd weeks, consecutive weeks in the top 10 for somebody who always had injuries. I think every alternate year there was something or the other, and he also has, if I'm not mistaken, the chronic foot issue, right? The Muller-Weiss syndrome or whatever. I think that's what it's called. To be able to push through that pain and to play for so long and to be successful for so long, I think we pretty much most of us, just the way, the nature of his game, right? Nothing about it is conventional. I have had the good fortune of playing tennis, not very well. I don't play very well, but there is a huge difference between watching a sport on TV, which I had done for so long, and once I started playing the sport, I began to appreciate the kind of things these guys do on court, right? Nadal hits an insanely heavy ball. Sometimes, when you watch live matches, there is a camera angle which is a lot lower than what is typically used for broadcasts. Those are the angles which are my absolute favorite because that's when you can see the weight of shot, the way people load up. Like different players have different ways of loading up their body for their forehands or backhands, or the way they accelerate or decelerate, right? In Nadal's case, if you look at his game early on, right, there was the theater of his appearance and how incongruous it all was, and all the idiosyncrasies with the bottles and the wedgies and the putting the hair behind his ear and all of that. Leaving that aside, the game that he had initially, you didn't really think this was going to A, translate to different surfaces, and B, there was several obvious weaknesses, right? The serve was very weak. And it has always been, I mean, relatively speaking, a weakness. He never got as many free points of his serve as Federer did throughout his career and as Djokovic is doing now, right? Never. And even though he did improve his backhand, and uh, over the course of his career, it definitely improved, particularly towards the end when he had that second wind, 2017 onwards. But obviously, it was never a match for Djokovic's backhand, right? So, so I mean, for me, that's the only trait. I mean, that's what has made him who he is. To be honest, I mean, to get to 22 Grand Slams, uh, he played the bridesmaid to Federer for so long, and then towards the second half of his career, he had to be number two to Djokovic, right? But at the same time, he kept finding ways to beat the two of them enough. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation, and he wouldn't have 22 Grand Slams. So I would say, yeah, will over skill. I mean, even though I'm not saying that there was no skill there, there was an insane amount of skill. I mean, the balls he hits, okay. Just to put it into context, when you are playing, when the ball reaches you above your eye level, right, it is very difficult, especially on your backhand side, to be able to generate enough power to trouble your opponent, right? The best you can typically do, like C grade, D grade players like me, the best I can do is like feebly hit a slice, right? That's the exact way in which he tortured and tormented Federer for so long. He hits such a heavy ball, it takes the racket out of your hands. And I mean, there was that famous RPM study they did, right? The number of revolutions he puts on the ball. I mean, those aspects of his game were completely unique, and the opposition had to find different ways of countering it, right? Um, that's to me, that's really, normally these idiosyncratic kind of players who don't have a conventional technique, they might win, but they generally don't have, a Hall of Fame all-time great kind of career. So in that sense, this was for me. This was the one standout thing for Nadal. I think a lot of it was will, just the will to improve, the will to change things, and yeah, to give it all. I think that's for me the enduring trait.
It is actually quite fitting, and I don't know if it is destiny or what it is, but the French Open is associated with the phrase victory belongs to the most
To the
persevering.
most tenacious, most tenacious. It's
Yes.
written on
So
the side on the stadium.
this quote is
Yeah,
often
yeah.
ascribed to Napoleon, but it applies to Nadal as well. Victory belongs to the most. I knew it was persevering. So you've largely talked about my next question in the current answer. So just just to highlight, what changes did you see in Nadal's game over his career from the early 2000s till the recent years?
There was definitely the serve. Oh, and in the early days, his forehand was a lot. It was obviously a very heavily spinning ball, but he would not really be able to flatten it out when required, especially on faster surfaces. So I think those subtle changes to his grip that he made, and that's something we started to see during the 2010 US Open. The serve was obviously one because he started consistently, and even towards the end of his career, I believe he was serving at around 115 to 120 miles per hour. His first serve was much improved. The movement and mobility was always there. What is not talked about enough is that if you leave Roger Federer to one side, to me, Nadal had the best net game of anyone in the last 20 years. I think that is another area which he improved massively, and it's just not talked about enough. Just off the top of my head, when you think about the 2008 final, right? To have the guts to do that right at the end of the match, coming in behind, I mean, let's face it, it was never the best serve, right? He did it as a sort of surprise tactic to maybe probably like throw Federer off a bit or whatever it was. But over the course of his career, that became a fairly impenetrable part of his game. He pretty much always had a very high success rate when he came forward over the last 10-12 years. So I think that's a very underappreciated aspect of his game. We all look at the speed, the movement, the banana shots, and the sky hook that he hits, which is again one shot which I don't think anybody hits better than him. But yeah, his net game, absolutely, he improved it incredibly over the course of his career.
And there is this amazing shot that he hits, which I have not seen many people hit, or probably anyone hit. He has this ability to hit the tweener as a lob.
Yeah, that Madrid match against Djokovic, that famous
And he
shot.
does it
That was
consistently. It's not like a one-off thing. If he's hitting the
yeah,
tweener, he's usually hitting it as a lob.
as a lob, which goes to show, right? They probably practice these things. I mean, that's just you hit something like that in practice. You're like, oh, I just accidentally galti se mistake ho gaya type. But I mean, yeah,
So
that's again another.
while preparing for this video, I came across some. I was trying to find criticism of Nadal, which is legitimate criticism, not like fanboy criticism. So one of
Not the doping stuff and all
yes,
that.
not the stuff like my wife is prettier than yours, which is
Yeah.
not good criticism. Anyway, so what I found is there's this in various threads, various Reddit subreddits, all of that. People have alluded to that Nadal did have a significant improvement in his serve going up to the 2010 US Open, and somehow he lost that improvement.
It tailed off. Yes, it tailed off. And then it came back, I think, in 2013, the 2013 US Open. This is one of those things which it seemed like he was just tweaking or changing just before the hard court swing, the North American hard court swing. So, I mean, I'm sure there are reasons for that. I mean, I'm not sure why, but yes, that also has been a pattern. It's not like his serve reached a level and stayed there. It's been up and down, and he's tweaked it depending on the tournament.
One of the hypotheses was that Djokovic's return game was so strong that even if there was an improvement, it was not as apparent, or he did not bother to improve that aspect of his game and focused on the other aspect where he could find weaknesses in Djokovic's repertoire.
Probably. That's what these two have forced each other to do throughout their career. So I wouldn't be surprised if he would have done a cost benefit analysis like we do in our boring corporate jobs. So probably they would have done some sort of trade off analysis there.
Okay, so this is the last question. It was a very interesting discussion as always. So we'll just end with this, and of course, if you have any thoughts, you're more than free, more than welcome to share it with us. But my last question to you is, how will you remember Nadal as the tennis player, as the human being? What will you remember him as?
Um, Look, the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, we don't need to belabor the point. All-time great. Some would argue greatest of all time. That's a separate debate, and that's going to take several hours of discussion. Though, I mean, there is one player who is making the discussion kind of irrelevant. But if you just look at a couple of numbers, right? The one I mentioned about, he did not leave the top 10 for 900 plus weeks, which was absolutely completely like nobody expected this, to be honest. I'm sure he himself, I'd lay a wager and say he himself wouldn't have foreseen this. So to be able to maintain that level of consistency, keeping those, factoring in those injuries, right? It also takes a certain level of mental strength, right? At the elite level, where you know you have millimeters and thousands of percentage points which make a difference, right? To be able to go off the tour for 2 3 months, have those potentially career-threatening injuries, dealing with those mentally, coming back and just knocking off Rome, Monte Carlo, Rome for the French Open. It seems easy. It seems like he can win those titles in his sleep. But like I said, it's the will is a big part of who he is and what he has achieved, and also some of the things he says in interviews, right? Things like in this life you have to enjoy suffering. It just gives you a sort of window into what he is as a human being, right? The way he sees his life as a sports person. I think those are those are life lessons as well, right? Anybody who has taken those lessons and reached the absolute top and stayed there for so long, clearly he was doing something right. And also in his final speech, right after that loss at the Davis Cup, his point. I mean, he basically said, I'm just a guy from a village in Mallorca, and uh, the point he made about, I appreciate that a lot of people work hard, a lot of people do their best, but I have also been very lucky. So I think there is this uh, different people, different strokes for different folks, right? Probably Djokovic is someone who has this, I mean, persecution mentality. Let's say, I have achieved everything against all odds, which is again, to each his own. Um, Tremendous adversity. He overcame tremendous adversity to get to where he is. But some of the things this guy says I resonate with a lot more, because a lot of things in life are not in your control. But what is definitely in your control is you can give your, I try my best, as he says. I think those are virtues which serve you well in any field, in any walk of life, right? And the numbers, all the couple of numbers which tie into this 900 plus weeks in the top 10. One is that he has won slams in 3 different decades. There was another one I read. He is, I think, the okay, he's one amongst three people, the other two being Pete Sampras and Ken Rosewall. These are the only three men who won slams in their teens, in their 20s, and in their 30s. So these are incredible achievements, and a lot of, I mean, as I said, I have said it repeatedly. It was his playing style, the way he moved, the way he kept getting injured. It never seemed like he was ever going to reach, these numbers. So that's just, that's incredible. I think tennis is definitely poorer because, of course, because of the style of play, because a lot of the players today, these things are not taught by coaches. No coach will ever teach you Nadal's extreme Western grip for forehands, because it's a very, if you just experiment trying to hit the ball like he does, and finishing high over your head. Believe me, I have tried, and it's just not something you teach, right? And to be able to succeed at that level, to beat the very best, to be the very best, impressive. Quite a career, quite a career, I would say.
And that incredibly difficult shot was his bread and butter shot. He
That
had
was his bread and butter. Yeah,
he had described that shot in his autobiography, Rafa, as the my favorite shot against his weakest shot.
yeah.
In the
I mean,
description.
that shot basically it pulls you off the court, right? With Djokovic, obviously, with his greatest backhand of all time, has been able to do is to cut that shot off, step in and take it early, which mere mortals cannot do. 99% of players cannot do. And when you are receiving the ball over your head, it's just incredible. It's I mean, just appreciating the mechanics of his game as well. Nothing about it was conventional, to be very honest, and he still succeeded. So
One of
that
my
that alone is very impressive.
One of my most memorable quotes from his book autobiography is, again, I'm not going to quote him because I'll get it wrong, but what he meant to say was, most of us who are not from the world of professional sports, we look at sports as an activity which helps in improving our health. But if you play sports professionally, it
Profession
actually is worse for your health, which he has exemplified.
and
Incredibly
yeah,
fit player
yeah,
who has so many injuries.
and in fact, um, I think it was Robert Lewandowski. I saw one of his. So he was talking about Nadal a couple of days back. Apparently, I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Lewandowski. So they were talking on the phone apparently, and one of the things that Nadal told him. So I think he communicated the decision. I probably am thinking of quitting, etc. One of the things he said was, "I want to have a normal life. I want to walk and move normally for the sake of my son." So I mean, these are things, I mean, we generally don't think of these things when we look at sports persons, but to be able to push your, I mean, it holds true for all sports, right? To be able to push your body to the absolute limit. I mean, they are human, we are human, but I am human in the same way as, I am a car if I compare myself to elite athletes, right? So that was again a very sort of it gives you perspective, right? Maybe that grand farewell at Court Philippe Chatrier and all of that was probably it was not meant to be. Another fitting thing was that his last victory was on Court Philippe Chatrier, and I believe even I think Federer's last professional victory was on Center Court, Wimbledon. So in a way, I mean that's life, right? It's generally you don't get happy endings, even if you are, the greatest of greats.
Yes. So
And on that somber note,
Nadal, as I remember him, my memory of Nadal is that player who was everywhere on court. You couldn't find a place on court to hit the ball where Nadal couldn't reach. And not only would he reach the ball, he would hit a shot that you would not be able to reach.
yeah,
But that is the impression that we have as spectators, that this guy has so much fitness that he can reach every ball. You can't miss the line. If you just a little bit within the lines, he'll reach it and hit
yeah,
it as a return. But the effort that has gone into being so fit and how much that has taken out of his body, that only people close to him know, and we who have read his autobiography or followed his career closely, we are aware of. And so it really, as you said,
yeah,
gives perspective. This sport is good for health. Professional sport often is not.
yeah, absolutely.
So, so this was a discussion on Rafael Nadal, and I will urge you to join us more often because there's so much to discuss about other topics also.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, thank you so much
If
for
time
doing this.
permits,
Thank you so much
yes,
for doing it.
appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Really,
Good fun, and I hope your viewers take at least something out of this.
I'm sure they will. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you. I'll see you. Bye bye.
Bye.